What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. How was a pharmacy in medieval Europe like? Apothecaries first emerged in monasteries and convents before being incorporated into guilds to provide services to the general public. However, the medication they prescribed was significantly different from the one we know today. In the Middle Ages, plagues and diseases were not uncommon among Europeans. They did what we do today when we have health issues. They turned to medicine in the hope of finding a cure or, at least, relief from pain. Products that are still known as ointments, pills, and potions were purchased, consumed, or applied by individuals. However, this medication's chemistry was very different because it was made from natural substances that were once thought to be curative or even miraculous. These included mineral waters, products derived from animals or even humans, such as nails, urine, blood, and, most importantly, a wide variety of plants. Precious stones like agate were thought to treat eye problems, and jasper was thought to treat hemorrhoids. The Greek physician Dioscorides published a pharmacopoeia known as De Materia Medica, which was widely distributed throughout the medieval West as well as the Arab and Muslim world. It provided descriptions of botanical terms and medicinal uses for hundreds of plants. Numerous curative properties were attributed to particular plants. Dioscorides says that the cyclamen plant can be used to treat everything from jaundice and headaches to constipation, cold sores, acne, and alopecia in a potion. Because some of the spices they traded from the East were thought to have medicinal properties, spice traders, also known as épiciers in French and speziali in Italian, had close ties to apothecaries. For example, cinnamon and anise were used to prevent bad breath. Itinerant healers would occasionally prepare poultices, potions, and lotions and sell them door to door or on the streets. However, there were also dispensaries known as apothecaries, which came from the Greek word for storehouse, and were the forerunners of today's drugstores and pharmacies. Monks' asylum. These apothecaries have a long history of being associated with convents, monasteries, and abbeys. Pilgrims and those in need could frequently stay at monastic foundations locations. Since many of those using these houses called hospitals were also sick, the monks sought ways to treat their ailments, and so the word hospital acquired its modern sense. Monks were suited to be physicians. They had access to scientific books in their libraries, including the Dioscorides treatise and numerous other texts that were widely available in medieval Europe and the Muslim world. Additionally, they had the material resources. Monks knew which medicinal plants to grow in their monastery gardens because of their knowledge. The first pharmacies were established as separate rooms or spaces in this manner. In the 11th century, a monk by the name of Romuald established a community of Benedictine monks that operated a hospital for the poor in Camaldoli, which is east of Florence. In 1048, the pharmacy at Camaldoli was mentioned. According to sources from the 16th century, the abundant botanical garden provided medicinal herbs. The Dominican convent in Florence, Italy, next to the later-built Basilica of Santa Maria Novella, was built in 1221. Santa Maria Novella was a precursor to the modern drugstore during the Renaissance era when the friars treated a wealthy Florentine merchant. As a result, the friars' pharmacy gained widespread fame. In the 13th century, the rise of physician guilds coincided with a tightening of the distinction between doctor and apothecary. Apothecaries were hired to prepare medicines because doctors thought it was impolite to do so. Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Sicily, issued the Constitutions of Melfi in 1231. They established that doctors were only permitted to prescribe medicines rather than prepare them. Apothecaries, on the other hand, were only allowed to prepare remedies under the direction of a physician and were not allowed to prescribe them. Apothecaries occasionally pushed the boundaries of their profession. In 1281, the statutes of the Faculty of Medicine in Paris tightened up on apothecaries and made it illegal for them to visit the sick or give medicine without a doctor's prescription. Age of guilds. The rise of guilds made the work of apothecaries subject to legal regulation. The Guild of Spice Merchants Apothecaries of Paris was governed by royal statutes in 1353 that stated that no one could practice as an apothecary if he or she did not know how to read prescriptions or had no one who did. The sale of dangerous or poisonous medicines was outlawed, and bottles had to be labeled with the year and month they were made. Additionally, Apothecaries were urged to maintain a loyal, reasonable, and moderate price for their products. Each apothecary's shop was inspected at least twice a year by a master of apothecaries, assisted by 2 physicians appointed by the dean of the Faculty of Medicine, who carefully examined all of the substances that could be found inside. This was done to ensure that the rules were being followed. Women physicians. The idea of women working as druggists, pharmacists, and doctors in Europe's male-dominated medical guilds sparked hostility despite evidence of women physicians in antiquity. Women's medical activities were attempted to be limited to midwifery. Despite this, women's traditional roles as caregivers gave them the knowledge they needed to work as healers. It became fashionable for women to compile books of receipts or recipes, detailing how to make remedies for a variety of conditions in England in the 17th century, reflecting a surge in female literacy. Only later were recipes associated with food. The late English author Hannah Woolley from the 17th century is widely regarded as one of these authors. Woolley is credited with writing The Gentlewoman's Companion, in which she urged women to acquire competent skills in physical and chiropractic medicine and surgery in order to achieve social usefulness. She made the connection between the work of a pharmacist and a physician and upward social mobility. Women with expertise in medicine and healing were among the Quaker colonists who, along with William Penn, set sail from England for America in 1682. The information they imparted to their fellow settlers would play a crucial role in the day-to-day operations of the Pennsylvania colony. A pharmacy in medieval Europe, referred to as an apothecary, represented a captivating convergence of medicine, religion, trade, and tradition. It functioned as both a practical hub for healing and a symbolic link between the mystical and scientific realms of the Middle Ages. To grasp the essence of such a place, one must first envision the social, spiritual, and intellectual landscape of Europe during that time, when the distinction between science and superstition was often indistinct. Disease was perceived not only as a physical ailment but also as a moral or spiritual challenge. Apothecaries originated in monasteries and convents, where monks and nuns began to experiment with remedies to assist pilgrims, the impoverished, and the ill who sought refuge in their abbeys. Monasteries served as repositories of knowledge, preserving manuscripts from antiquity, including the works of Hippocrates, Galen, and notably Dioscorides. His De Materia Medica was meticulously copied, studied, and utilized as a reference for centuries, offering an extensive compendium of plants, minerals, and animal products believed to remedy nearly every human condition. These monasteries also nurtured medicinal gardens abundant with herbs such as sage, rosemary, mint, lavender, and wormwood, which were harvested, dried, and stored in small chambers that would eventually transform into pharmacies. The pharmacy, frequently a dimly lit room within a monastery or a secluded area of a convent, was filled with the strong aromas of dried herbs, resins, and spices. The shelves were stocked with jars made of glass, ceramic, or even wood, each jar containing powders, ointments, dried plants, or animal parts, all meticulously labeled in Latin. In this environment, monks served as both chemists and healers, diligently grinding herbs with mortars and pestles, distilling liquids in rudimentary alembics, and concocting remedies that ranged from simple herbal teas to intricate elixirs. Unlike contemporary medicine, these treatments were not founded on chemical synthesis but were instead based on the theory of Humer's blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile rooted in Galenic medicine. The primary aim was to restore balance within the body. Thus, a patient suffering from fever, believed to be caused by an excess of heat and yellow bile, might receive cooling herbs, purgatives, or even bloodletting in conjunction with herbal infusions. Conversely, an individual experiencing melancholy could be treated with warming spices and uplifting tonics. Over time, these apothecaries expanded beyond monasteries, emerging in towns and cities, particularly after the 11th century, as guilds were established to regulate the profession. This led to a clear differentiation between physicians, who diagnosed illnesses and wrote prescriptions, and apothecaries, who prepared and dispensed medicines. The division was formalized by Frederick II's Constitutions of Melfi in 1231, which prohibited doctors from preparing remedies themselves and restricted apothecaries from prescribing treatments without a physician's supervision. However, in practice, apothecaries frequently blurred these boundaries and offered medical advice, much to the annoyance of physicians. An apothecary's shop located in a vibrant medieval city such as Paris, Florence, or London would be a bustling and fragrant establishment, filled with sacks of imported spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, anise, and ginger, stored alongside local herbs. These were utilized not only for culinary purposes but also for medicinal applications, as many spices were believed to prevent disease, alleviate indigestion, or mask unpleasant odors, which were thought to harbor illness. Apothecaries were closely associated with spice merchants, many of whom began their careers as epiciers or speziali before transitioning into specialized medical practice. Within these establishments, medicines were formulated not only from botanical sources but also from minerals and animal products. Powdered pearls, crushed gemstones, ground antlers, dried toads, bear fat, human hair, and even urine and blood were incorporated into remedies, as each substance was thought to possess a natural essence or latent property capable of restoring health. For instance, jasper was recommended for hemorrhoids, agate for eye ailments, and powdered mummy, referred to as mumia, was marketed as a cure-all, despite its questionable origin from embalmed human remains imported from Egypt. Although such remedies may appear peculiar today, they were widely accepted within the cultural and medical paradigms of the era. To prevent fraud, apothecaries were regulated by their guilds and universities, with inspectors reviewing their products biannually to ensure that jars were accurately labeled, hazardous substances were managed appropriately, and prices were reasonable, given that medicines were costly and vital for survival during periods of plague, famine, or warfare. Nevertheless, despite this oversight, apothecaries maintained a semi-autonomous reputation, frequently extending the limits of their practice by diagnosing ailments or directly selling cures to patients, particularly among the impoverished who could not afford the services of university-trained physicians, which led to ongoing friction between the two professions, especially in cities like Paris, where in 1281 the statutes of the Faculty of Medicine prohibited apothecaries were restricted from visiting patients. However, beyond the structures and regulations of the guild, the daily tasks of an apothecary were demanding and necessitated both expertise and skill. This included drying herbs at the appropriate season, grinding roots into powders, preparing ointments from animal fats blended with aromatic herbs, and distilling syrups using honey or sugar imported from the East. These processes not only preserved the medicine but also enhanced its flavor, leading patients to visit the shop to acquire these remedies in the form of pills, tinctures, balms, or tonics. Wealthier clients might request custom preparations based on a physician's prescription, which the apothecary would meticulously interpret and execute. Women also contributed to this field, despite encountering resistance from male-dominated guilds, as their roles as midwives, caregivers, and domestic healers provided them with knowledge of herbal remedies. In some instances, women operated apothecary shops themselves or compiled recipe books filled with household cures, as exemplified in 17th-century England by Hannah Woolley, whose writings bridged domestic knowledge with professional medicine, offering women a pathway to respectability and social advancement. In the colonies, Quaker women transported this healing knowledge to America, where it became integral to daily survival. Thus, a medieval pharmacy was not merely a place for medicine but a microcosm of medieval society, reflecting the interaction of ancient texts, monastic education, urban commerce, guild regulations, gender dynamics, and cultural beliefs regarding health and the human body. It was a space where the scents of rosemary and cinnamon mingled with the sharpness of sulfur or vinegar, where glass jars filled with colored powders stood alongside dried roots and bones, and where remedies could be either miraculous or toxic. Where the knowledge of ancient civilizations converged with the practical approaches of monks and traders, and where Europeans, confronted with plagues and ailments they could hardly comprehend, sought solace, remedies, and optimism from the enigmatic practice of the apothecary, whose position as the precursor to the contemporary pharmacist stands as one of the most lasting contributions of medieval medicine. Medieval Europe's apothecary was a complicated institution that served a population that was constantly haunted by the specters of pestilence, injury, and premature death. It was a crucial nexus of emerging science, enduring superstition, monastic charity, burgeoning urban commerce, and profound medical ignorance. By the late 13th or early 14th century, entering a well-established urban apothecary shop meant entering a realm of overwhelming sensory overload and potent mystique. The air would be thick, warm, and heavily fragrant, with lavender, sage, rosemary, and rue, drying herbs hanging in bunches from the low ceiling beams, mixing with the sharper, more exotic aromatics of imported spices like cinnamon, cloves, and pepper. The earthy pungency of roots and barks steeped the space itself, demonstrated the apothecary's dual function as merchant and craftsman. Theriaca, a well-known and complex antidote. Syrupus papavers, a poppy syrup for pain. And Bolus armenicus, an astringent clay, with the names of their contents painted on the surfaces of sturdy oak shelves along the walls. Albarello jars are ceramic vessels with slightly concave wastes that can be easily grasped by the hand or tied with a label. Bulk ingredients were stored in larger storage jars, typically made of glass or stronger pottery. The master apothecary and his apprentices would work behind a long, high counter, using mortars and pestles of varying sizes, from small marble ones for delicate gums and resins to massive stone ones mounted on the floor for grinding hard roots. In readiness to measure the tiniest amounts of expensive saffron or potentially lethal hemlock, exquisite brass scales. The alembics and retorts of distillation apparatus, developed by Arab alchemists and becoming increasingly integral to the art, may be bubbling gently in a corner, transforming wine into aqua vitae or extracting a plant's quintessence. This place was more than just a store, it was also a laboratory, a store, and a theater of hope. The sick and the desperate came to this place in search of relief from their suffering, putting their faith in a combination of ancient wisdom, empirical observation, and plain old folklore. The religious and academic institutions of the time, such as monasteries and convents, were the very foundations upon which this profession was founded. Religious orders had to take care of the sick, both within the monastic community and among the poor and pilgrims who sought refuge at their gates in a world without public health infrastructure. The cura corporis care of the body and cura anime care of the soul Christian mandates for charity made monasteries ideal incubators for medical and pharmaceutical knowledge. Monks were perfectly suited for this position. Because they were among the few people who could read and write, they had access to the ancient texts that were still around in their library scriptoria. The Greek physician Dioscorides' De Materia Medica, a first-century pharmacopoeia that was tirelessly copied and preserved throughout the medieval period, both in the West and in an enhanced form in the Arab world, was crucial to their ability to study foundational works. This massive book gave in-depth descriptions of hundreds of plants, including how they looked, where they were found, and, most importantly, the medicinal properties of those plants. The herbalist's Bible in medieval times. In addition, monasteries controlled land and had the organizational capacity to keep extensive herb gardens, physic gardens that were meticulously planned in accordance with their ancient texts. They cultivated the medicinally important plants that Dioscorides and other authorities had decreed. Opium poppy for sleep and pain, fennel for digestion, sage for cleansing, valerian for nerves, and many more. The storage, preparation, and compounding of these medicinal ingredients took place in a specific room within the monastic complex, often near the pilgrim's hospice or infirmary, the hospitium, from which the word hospital comes. From the Greek word apothek, which means storehouse, this was the first apothecary. The pharmacy that the Benedictine monks established at the Abbey of Santa Maria in Camaldoli, near Florence, in 1048, where a well-known garden supplied the herbs needed to treat the poor at their hospital, is a prime example. This model of monastic pharmaceutical care spread throughout Christendom, establishing a tradition of preparing remedies based on classical knowledge that would eventually move out of the cloister and into the expanding markets of medieval cities. A fascinating and frequently perplexing reflection of a worldview that combined the natural with the supernatural, the empirical with the symbolic. The vast arsenal of substances from which these medieval remedies were formulated was the materia medica itself. It came from the three kingdoms of nature as defined by medieval and ancient science: animal, vegetable, and mineral, rather than the standardized, synthesized chemistry of modern pharmaceuticals. The apothecary's art was unquestionably based on the plant kingdom. Apothecaries used hundreds of herbs, flowers, roots, barks, and seeds, guided by Dioscorides, Pliny, Galen, and Arab commentators like Ibn Sina Avicenna. The humoral theory, which posited that health was a balance of four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and that plants could restore this balance thanks to their own humoral qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, dictated their use. A cold plant like lettuce or violet could be used to treat a hot disease like a fever. However, the reasoning frequently went far beyond this. The widespread belief known as the doctrine of signatures holds that God placed a signature or sign on plants to indicate their intended use. Lungwort, with its lung-shaped leaves, was used to treat pulmonary conditions. Pulmonaria, with its spotted leaves, was thought to be used to treat a diseased lung. The hollow stalk of garlic represented wind in the body's pipes. And bloodroot, with its vibrant red sap, was used to treat blood disorders. The mineral kingdom was included in this symbolic thinking. It was believed that semi-precious and precious stones had potent curative properties. The eye-like bands on an agate could be worn or ground into a powder to treat eye conditions. Jasper, particularly the red variety, was used to stop bleeding and treat hemorrhoids because it was associated with blood. Powdered pearl was a tonic and antidote to poison, and emerald was good for the heart and eyes.